My beloved grandson said my savings were just free money, that he'd get it all eventually anyway. He thought I wouldn't notice when he started making small withdrawals from my account. He thought old age meant naivety, that bank notifications were just spam. But I was an accountant. I tracked every number, and when he came asking for a gift for his startup, every account was already frozen, except one, the one where I had moved it all, under a different name, my new name. If this story resonated with your soul, click subscribe and let me know in the comments which city or country you're listening from. I'm truly curious to know where you're tuning in from. My name is Nancy Hudson. I was 72 years old and lived alone in a small, sun-washed house in Sarasota, Florida. It was a single-story place with creaking hardwood floors, lace curtains I made myself, and the scent of lemon polish always lingering faintly in the hallway. I had worked as a school district accountant for almost 40 years before retiring, and I never really let go of the habits that job had instilled in me. Every receipt still went in a labeled envelope. Every statement got printed, hole-punched, and filed. I had a drawer full of ledgers, most of them decades old. Some people hoarded trinkets. I hoarded order. Even after I left the office world, I treated my personal finances like a full-time job. Once a month, I sat at the kitchen table with a pot of coffee, a yellow legal pad, and my checkbook. I would compare digital records with paper copies, make notes in margins, and highlight anything that looked even slightly off. Most months there was nothing unusual, but I still checked. It wasn't about paranoia, it was about pride. Because that money wasn't just money, it was a lifetime in digits. It was every birthday I worked overtime instead of taking the day off. Every winter, I drove through storms so payroll would be finished. Every coat I wore a season longer than I wanted to. Every coupon I clipped. Every meal I made from leftovers. Every impulse I denied. That money represented control, freedom, the dignity of never having to ask for help. I didn't live lavishly. I drove a 10-year-old sedan with a dent in the bumper and wore clothes that lasted longer than most people's relationships. But I was comfortable. I had no debts, no unpaid bills, no worries about whether I could afford a doctor or a roof repair. I even had a little extra, a savings account I rarely touched, a small investment portfolio I checked quarterly, and a modest emergency fund set aside for unforeseen circumstances. Though I had planned so carefully, there were rarely any. Retirement had its challenges, of course. The days were long and sometimes quiet in ways that made me feel small. After my husband died 5 years ago, the silence deepened. Grief comes in waves, they say, but mine came in decimals and missed calls. I coped the way I always had, by staying organized. I took up budgeting software just for the thrill of digital reconciliation. I tracked energy usage and grocery spending. It gave me comfort. I had always believed that being financially aware was a kind of self-respect. Not because I was afraid of losing everything, but because I didn't want to become someone who ignored the fine print. Life, in my experience, always wrote its terms in fine print, so when my grandson Alex moved in with me, I didn't worry, not at first. He had just graduated from college, full of ideas and caffeine, and asked if he could stay with me just for a little while he figured things out. He said it like I was doing him a favor, but truthfully, I was the one who had been feeling adrift. I missed noise. I missed motion. I missed being needed. He brought life back into the house, streaming music in the afternoons, sneakers by the door, pizza boxes in the trash. He was charming and polite, always offering to do the dishes or carry in the groceries. He called me Gran and kissed me on the cheek every morning before heading to the coffee shop down the street, where he said he worked on projects. I never asked too many questions. I believed in giving people space to become themselves. But I also believed in watching patterns. And I had my patterns too. Every month, like clockwork, I did my accounting. That month, 3 weeks after Alex had moved in, I noticed something strange: a debit for $90 at a convenience store I had never visited. Then another, $73 for a rideshare app I didn't use. And a third, $120 marked as transfer to external account. They were small amounts, easy to miss, and perhaps, once, I would have assumed they were errors or glitches. But my instincts had kept a school district's books clean for decades, and those instincts told me something was wrong. I didn't say anything. Not then. I wanted to be sure. I kept quiet, watching, noting each new charge that didn't belong. I changed nothing in the house, kept my routines, smiled when Alex came home, asked about his day. I didn't want confrontation. I wanted clarity, because numbers don't lie. And neither did I. It started with a text message. I had just finished folding laundry when I heard the familiar buzz of my phone on the countertop. I walked over slowly, expecting maybe a reminder from my doctor's office or one of those promotional offers from the pharmacy. Instead, it was a message from my bank. Unusual activity alert. A new device has accessed your account. If this was not you, please contact us immediately. My first instinct wasn't panic. It was calculation. I had never accessed my account from any device other than my personal laptop, which sat closed and undisturbed in the living room cabinet. I didn't use apps. I didn't bank from my phone. I liked paper. I liked control. I liked knowing exactly which window my money passed through. I opened the banking website from my laptop and signed in. My fingers moved with practiced ease, as they had for years. Within seconds, I was staring at the activity log. My heart didn't race, but my eyes did sharpen. The timestamp on the login didn't match any of my sessions. It had been accessed the night before, sometime after midnight. I wasn't awake then, but I knew who was. Alex often stayed up late, the soft light under his door flickering long after I had gone to bed. He said he was brainstorming, researching, sometimes gaming. I never questioned it. He was young. That was what young people did. But now that pattern meant something different. I clicked on the Transactions tab. There it was again. 3 small withdrawals, each under $150. Spaced out by days, almost random in appearance. A sneaker store, an online food delivery, a payment tagged as personal transfer. Small enough to hide beneath most people's radar. But I wasn't most people. I didn't say anything that morning. I made breakfast as usual. I poured orange juice into his favorite glass, the one with the chipped corner he insisted gave it character. I sat across from him at the table and listened while he talked about a new tech startup he was interested in. His hands moved quickly when he spoke, expressive and full of energy. I nodded, smiled, but I wasn't hearing him. I was reading him. I watched how comfortable he looked, how easily he reached for his phone, how casually he left it face down beside his plate. I thought about all the passwords I'd never shared with anyone, about how my bank only recently added 2-step verification, and how I had never changed the recovery email from the one Alex helped me set up a year ago. It's the little things that tell the story. I knew I needed to be careful. This wasn't a stranger. This was my grandson, the child I used to read bedtime stories to, the boy who once cried when his balloon floated away at the county fair, the young man I invited into my home because I believed he was searching for purpose, not opportunity. But even the best intentions can be misread. That afternoon, I pulled out a notepad and began listing everything: the dates of each transaction, the merchant, the amount. I printed my bank statement, I highlighted entries I knew for certain weren't mine. And I called my old friend Carol, who used to work in fraud prevention for a local credit union. I didn't give her details, just asked general questions about permissions, account alerts, digital tracing. She asked if I'd been hacked. I said, not exactly. I started changing things quietly. I updated passwords, removed the recovery email, requested physical statements instead of electronic. I ordered a new debit card under the guise of expiration, then switched my online login entirely. Piece by piece, I began sealing the cracks, but I still said nothing to Alex, because part of me wanted to believe I was wrong, that there was some explanation I hadn't uncovered yet, that maybe, just maybe, he'd come to me first, apologize, confess, offer the truth before I asked for it. But the truth didn't come. Only more charges, one for a gas station 2 towns over, another for a food delivery service I never used, and then a withdrawal, $200 cash, ATM. It was no longer an accident, it was a pattern, and I was no longer wondering if he had accessed my money. I was wondering how long he had been planning to do it. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft buzz of his television behind the wall. He had no idea I knew. He moved through the house with the confidence of someone untouched by suspicion. And maybe that was the hardest part, the ease with which he believed I would never see it. But I saw everything, because I always did. The question now wasn't if I would act, it was how. It was a Thursday evening, late spring. The sun had already dipped behind the tall palms, casting long shadows across the kitchen tile. I was pouring a fresh cup of tea when Alex strolled in, his sneakers squeaking faintly on the floor. He looked pleased with himself, like he'd just come from a successful interview or closed some invisible deal with the world. He grabbed a soda from the fridge, leaned against the counter, and started talking about some app idea he'd had, something about budgeting for Gen Z, but less boring. I listened politely, stirring honey into my cup, nodding in the right places. Then he said it. You know, Gran, all this stuff, your savings, your house, it's gonna be mine someday anyway. It just makes sense that I get to use some of it now, while it actually means something. He laughed like it was a joke, like he was just being cheeky. But his eyes didn't match the tone. They held a flash of something else. Entitlement, maybe. Or calculation. I didn't answer right away. I took a slow sip, letting the warmth slide down my throat. Then I smiled and said something non-committal, something like, "We'll see." I'm sure he thought I was just being old-fashioned or vague or tired, but inside me, something snapped into place. Not anger, not grief, certainty. He wasn't guessing anymore. He knew. He knew I'd noticed the charges. He knew I was watching. And instead of guilt, he offered rationalization. It's mine anyway. 4 words, but each one revealed more than he realized. He had already written me out of the equation. In his mind, I was just a placeholder, a gatekeeper, a wallet that hadn't been fully opened yet, and maybe I had helped create that illusion. I had been generous. I had never made a show of my finances. I had lived simply and quietly, never flashing wealth or withholding help. I had thought that discretion would be interpreted as strength, but he had mistaken it for weakness. Later that night, after he had gone out, probably to meet friends or pitch his idea to someone who would listen, I sat down with my laptop and opened every financial account I had. My checking, my savings, my emergency fund, my investment accounts. I reviewed every transaction again. Then I did what I had been preparing for since the first red flag. I froze them, one by one, locked down, temporarily inaccessible, until I said otherwise. I contacted my financial advisor the next morning and asked to begin the process of setting up a living trust. I wanted everything under new terms, not to punish, to protect. I created new passwords, changed usernames, requested hard tokens for two-factor authentication. I even opened a new account at a different bank and began the process of slowly transferring what I needed to sustain myself, quietly, steadily, all without a word to Alex. Because there was nothing left to say. He had shown me exactly how he saw me, with that offhand comment, with every charge he'd made behind my back, with every smug little laugh when I forgot how to turn off the Bluetooth on the TV. He thought I was slipping. He thought I was fading. He thought the numbers on the screen were disconnected from the life that had earned them. But I remembered every dollar. I remembered the first time I sat in a cubicle at the school district office, typing pay stubs while my infant son was at daycare. I remembered the years I patched up clothes and skipped vacations to add just a little more to my IRA. I remembered the Saturday mornings spent balancing books when everyone else slept in. He thought it was just money. He didn't see the cost, and that meant he didn't deserve the benefit. When he came home that evening, he didn't mention the accounts. Not yet. I could tell something had changed. He looked at his phone more often, typed longer, checked his email with furrowed brows. He didn't say anything to me, but he was searching, trying to understand why the well had suddenly gone dry. I just kept making dinner, chicken pot pie, his favorite, because I wanted him to remember something too. That generosity is not the same as obligation. That proximity does not equal ownership. And that sometimes the person you think is fading quietly into the background is simply stepping back to let you expose yourself. He had called it his, but he never earned it. And now he never would. It started with a drawer slamming. I was in the kitchen slicing apples for a pie when I heard the sound of his bedroom desk rattling shut. Not loud enough to alarm, but loud enough to register. I didn't turn around. I just listened. The tension in his movements had changed. There was urgency in the footsteps pacing behind his closed door. That kind of anxious restlessness I recognized from decades of tax season deadlines and error messages blinking on screens. Then came the first attempt. I knew the system would notify me. I had enabled every alert, email, text, push notification, and sure enough, at 3:11 p.m., I got one. Unsuccessful login attempt detected. Access to account has been locked for security reasons. He had tried to enter my online banking profile, the wrong password 3 times, locked himself out. I took a sip of my tea. The second notification came 10 minutes later. A new password reset request. Denied. He was probably staring at his screen in disbelief, clicking, refreshing, maybe even muttering under his breath. I imagined him cycling through every combination he had helped me set over the years. Birthdays, pet names, addresses, but none of them worked anymore because I had changed it all. Quietly, methodically, without warning. The silence in the house became its own conversation. I didn't go to him. I didn't call out. I just let it sit there. The absence of control, the confusion. The moment when realization sets in, but pride refuses to acknowledge it. A few hours passed. He emerged from his room and hovered in the hallway, pretending to look for something in the closet near the kitchen. I could feel his eyes on me as I wiped down the counter, waiting, testing, maybe hoping I'd bring it up first. I didn't. Instead, I asked if he'd be staying for dinner. He hesitated, then said yes. That night we ate in relative silence. The news played in the background, but neither of us was listening. I could see the wheels spinning in his head. He was thinking too hard, too fast, trying to decide if it was all in his imagination or if I had done something on purpose. And if so, why? He didn't ask. I didn't explain. That was the arrangement now. I let him live in the silence he had created. The next morning, I found the Wi-Fi router had been reset. A classic move. He was trying to access my devices, maybe even look for passwords saved to browsers. I smiled to myself. I'd switched back to paper. Nothing important lived online anymore. Not my banking, not my statements, not even my personal notes. I had printed everything and stored it in a locked file cabinet in the guest room closet. The only digital trace of anything useful was encrypted on a thumb drive tucked in my sewing box. He was learning a hard truth, one I had learned decades earlier in a very different world, that the person who appears the quietest in the room is often the one with the most power. That afternoon, another alert arrived. Attempted external transfer blocked. Unrecognized device. He was still trying, still convinced that the system had glitched, still unwilling to admit that I had changed the rules. I took a walk that evening, letting the warm Florida breeze soothe the edges of my thoughts. I passed the same neighbors I always did, Joan trimming her rose bushes, Bill washing his truck, a couple walking their golden retriever. I waved, smiled, made small talk. No one knew that a small battle was being waged back in my home, and I liked it that way. When I returned, Alex was at the table with his laptop open. He closed it quickly, too quickly, and asked how my walk was. I told him it was lovely. He looked tired, or maybe just unsteady. Something was shifting in him, and I could feel it. The confidence was cracking. The charm had worn thin. He hadn't gotten what he came for, and now he didn't know how to keep pretending. I knew what came next. There would be a request, a pitch, an explanation disguised as an opportunity. But I wasn't going to stop him. Sometimes you have to let people walk into a locked door before they understand it's not theirs to open. The error wasn't in the password. The error was in the assumption that I would never change it. He came into the kitchen mid-morning, freshly showered, with that rehearsed grin that he always wore when he wanted something. I was slicing oranges for my breakfast. The sun poured in through the windows, catching the fine dust in the air, and the whole room smelled of citrus and polished wood. He leaned against the counter and began his speech. There was a nervous energy underneath his confidence, like someone delivering a pitch they didn't fully believe in, but had practiced too many times to abandon. He told me he had an idea, a big one, something revolutionary, something scalable, something that was going to disrupt the financial space. A budgeting app, he said, but smarter, faster, intuitive, built for people like me, he added with a wink. He wanted to launch it. All he needed was an investment, just $10,000. He said the words, just $10,000, like it was the price of a new couch or a particularly indulgent vacation, as if those thousands hadn't taken me decades to save, as if that money hadn't been earned in after-hours reports and brown bag lunches and second-hand cardigans during Florida winters. He said it with the same ease he used when asking me to pick up milk from the store or to iron a shirt before an interview. Then came the part that made something in me go cold. It's not like it's not coming to me anyway. He said it casually, without venom, just fact, like it had already been decided, like my life, my work, my savings, all of it had simply been a placeholder until he was ready to collect. I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even stop slicing my orange. Instead, I walked over to the drawer near the pantry, pulled out a folded sheet of paper, and set it on the table between us. It was a printout, my account activity, the charges I hadn't made, the logins I hadn't authorized, the ATM withdrawal from 2 weeks ago. His name wasn't on any of it, but the timestamps, the locations, the patterns, they all pointed to him, and he knew it. He stared at the paper for a long time. His smile faded, slow and awkward, like a mask melting under too much heat. He tried to say something. I could see the excuses forming. It was just a test, or I meant to pay it back, or you said I could use the card for gas that one time, remember? But I didn't give him the space. I just stood there, quiet, still, entirely in control. Then I spoke. I told him that the accounts had been frozen, that the money had been moved, that everything was now under new protection, in my name only, with legal safeguards in place. I told him that this wasn't about the money. This was about trust, about the fact that he didn't ask. He just took, that he tried to use charm to replace honesty, that he had mistaken my silence for ignorance. I said all of it calmly, not to shame him, but to name the truth. He didn't argue. He didn't yell or storm out. He just looked down at the paper again, then turned and walked away. His footsteps were heavier than usual, slower. The kind of walk that happens when a person realizes the game is over and they're not the winner they thought they were. He stayed out most of that day. When he returned, he didn't mention the app, or the money, or the document on the table. He went to his room, shut the door quietly, and didn't come out for dinner. I didn't knock. That evening, I sat on the porch with my tea and listened to the crickets beginning their slow, soft rhythm. The breeze was warm, and the light was golden, the way it only gets in late spring. I breathed in and let the silence settle, not the silence of avoidance, but of resolution. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't called him a thief. I hadn't said, "You disappointed me," though maybe I should have. But I had made one thing perfectly clear. This wasn't a gift. This was protection. And the startup he had tried to launch, it collapsed before it ever began. Because some investments aren't measured in dollars, but in trust. And once that's gone, there's no pitch in the world that can bring it back. He didn't say he was leaving. There were no drawn-out conversations, no confessions, no slammed doors or tearful goodbyes. One morning, he simply wasn't in the kitchen. His coffee mug sat clean and untouched in the drying rack. The shoes that usually blocked the entryway were gone. The faint scent of his cologne had already begun to lift from the hallway. It was as if he had evaporated, dissolving quietly into the humid Florida air. I knocked on his bedroom door around noon, gently, not expecting anything. There was no answer. When I opened it, the room was stripped of personality. Not empty exactly, just vacant in the way only a once lived-in space can be. The bed was made hastily, as if done in a rush or out of obligation. The pillow still had the indent of his head. The desk was clear except for a forgotten pen and a used napkin. A single sock was curled up like a sleeping mouse in the corner. The wastebasket held a few snack wrappers, a receipt, and a torn envelope. And on the nightstand, a glass of water sat half full, dust starting to film across the rim. He hadn't left a note. He hadn't texted or called. This wasn't a goodbye. This was a quiet withdrawal. And somehow it didn't shock me. I had been bracing for it since the silence between us stopped feeling like distance and started feeling like detachment. The stillness he left behind was different from the one I knew after my husband died. That silence had been heavy with grief, soft and wet and full of weight. This one was clinical, dry. It didn't sting, it clarified. It carved out the space I hadn't realized I'd surrendered. It reminded me how much noise I had allowed into my life. noise that never belonged to me in the first place. I sat down on the edge of the bed, ran my hand over the rumpled cover, and looked at the sunlight shifting through the blinds. I let myself sit with the echo of his absence, not to mourn it, to acknowledge it. The room had been his for 5 months. 5 months of clutter, open tabs on my Wi-Fi, late-night door creaks, laundry half-folded. 5 months of casual requests, minor oversteps, and a slowly escalating discomfort I had swallowed again and again, until silence was the only thing left to digest. Now it was quiet, and I wasn't grieving. I began to clean, not from spite, but from instinct. When something ends, I return to ritual. I open the windows wide and let the real air in, the kind that carried birdsong and pollen, not tension. I stripped the bed, gathered the sheets in a tight roll, and hauled them to the laundry. I wiped the desk, the handles, the windowsill. I scrubbed the baseboards as if I were cleansing more than just dust. I vacuumed every corner, rearranged the books on the shelf into neat symmetry, and replaced the missing lamp bulb. By mid-afternoon, it looked like a guest room again. Not hollow, not waiting, just neutral. I stood in the doorway and exhaled. Not a sigh of relief exactly, but a breath that reached my ribs in a way it hadn't in months. Then I went to my office. I opened the drawer that held my most recent statements and began again. Bank records, trust documents, every account login. I checked each item off methodically, cross-referencing names, verifying two-step authorizations, updating questions, removing shared devices. I didn't hesitate. I didn't wonder whether it was too much. There was no such thing anymore. There was only what kept me safe. I shredded old cards with names I no longer trusted. I requested hard token authentication keys from my financial institutions. I deactivated autopay for any service I didn't recognize. I called my bank and reconfirmed every layer of security I had in place. The woman on the line said, "You're doing everything right, ma'am." And for once, I believed her. It wasn't about fear. It wasn't about paranoia. It was structure. Structure, I had learned, was the architecture of dignity. That night, I made dinner for one. A grilled cheese sandwich and a bowl of tomato soup, the same meal I used to make for him when he was little. I sliced a pickle on the side, poured myself a glass of sparkling water, and turned on Ella Fitzgerald. I didn't need to fill the silence. It was already full, and it belonged to me. I ate slowly, chewing thoughtfully, feeling the texture of each bite. I looked out the window and watched the wind move through the oak trees. There was no voice interrupting to ask for something, no flicker of screen light under the door, no dishes piling up without a thank you, just the quiet thrum of my own rhythm, restored. I didn't text him. I didn't call to ask where he'd gone or whether he was okay. He had made a choice, and so had I. In the following days, I found a stillness I had long forgotten. The coffee pot brewed exactly 2 cups. The towels were folded the same way every time. The house smelled like lemon and cedar again, not takeout and nervous sweat. The mail arrived in neat bundles. The sink stayed empty. I started reading again. Hard covers, not headlines. I began a handwritten letter to a friend in Maine. I found an old jigsaw puzzle with one piece missing and finished it anyway. I sat outside at dusk and listened to frogs thrum under the magnolias. Every now and then, I passed his room and paused, not because I wanted him back, but because it reminded me what happens when you let someone cross your boundaries without consequence, and what happens when you reclaim them. The room had grown quieter, but so had I. And in that stillness, I remembered something vital. Peace isn't the absence of people, it's the presence of self. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon, the kind of Florida day where the air felt like warm syrup and every movement required extra effort. I had just returned from the grocery store, balancing a brown paper bag with lemons, cat food, and a loaf of rosemary bread against one hip, still wearing my wide-brimmed straw hat and my sweat-dampened blouse. I was halfway through the kitchen threshold when the phone rang. I didn't need to see the number. I knew it was him. The tone was different. It wasn't the kind of call that announced itself with urgency or volume. It rang like a question, quiet and hesitant. I didn't answer right away. I set the bag down gently on the counter, removed my sandals, and turned off the radio. I didn't want background music. I wanted to hear every word. When I answered, his voice sounded smaller. Not in pitch, but in weight. He said, "Hi, Gran," and then paused. There was no charm in it, no cleverness, no disarming sweetness, just a raw, exposed sliver of vulnerability. He said he was sorry. He admitted to knowing what he'd done, even while he was doing it. He said that in the moment, it felt harmless, just a shortcut, a dip into something that would eventually be his anyway. He used the word entitled, and it didn't sound like a rehearsed line. It sounded like realization. He told me how he thought about how I hadn't yelled, hadn't accused, hadn't made a scene, and that somehow it had been worse than any confrontation. He said my silence had screamed. I didn't speak. I let him unravel his guilt at his own pace. He told me he had moved in with a friend, that he was working at a hardware store, stocking shelves, doing something with his hands, something, as he put it, real. He said he needed to learn the value of money, not as a concept, but as an effort, to understand for the first time what it meant to earn something from nothing. Then came the pause. I waited. I could feel the question forming before he asked it. Not the one about money, not even about returning. It was the only question that mattered. He asked if I could forgive him, and I breathed. Not because I needed time to decide, but because I needed to let the moment stretch. I needed to feel the weight of his voice, the way it had changed from demand to request. I forgave him because I meant it, because holding on to bitterness was not part of who I wanted to be. But I also told him something else, that forgiveness is not a time machine. That broken trust doesn't glue itself back together just because someone says they're sorry. That every relationship, parent and child, grandparent and grandchild, has a door, and that door only stays open with respect and care. He didn't speak right away. I heard the street around him, honking horns, the faint hum of passing cars. I imagined him standing still on a sidewalk somewhere, eyes on the ground, phone against his ear, finally understanding what it means when a person you love draws a boundary. And then he said something that caught me off guard. He said, "Thank you for not letting me get away with it." He didn't mean just the money. He meant the lie. The story he told himself that I was too old, too slow, too soft to notice. That story was gone now, replaced by something better, something honest. He didn't ask for access. He didn't ask for another chance. He thanked me for the line I had drawn. Not punishment, he said, boundaries. He said that word like it was new on his tongue, like it tasted different now, like it was something he was learning to build in his own life. We didn't hang up with closure, not the cinematic kind anyway. There was no dramatic ending, just a quiet understanding that the dynamic between us had shifted. It had matured, hardened in some places, softened in others. When I set the phone down, the house was just as it had been before the call. The radio still off, the groceries still resting on the counter, the lemons catching the afternoon light. But I was not the same. I stood in the kitchen, surrounded by scent and stillness, and realized that sometimes peace doesn't come from repair, it comes from recognition. And sometimes love means stepping back just far enough to let someone walk toward you on their own. If he did, I'd be here, but not waiting, not wounded, whole. It was a strange and steady peace, waking up and realizing I owed nothing to anyone. No one knocking at my bedroom door asking for gas money. No one tapping on my shoulder in the kitchen, hinting at bills they forgot to pay. No quiet pressure to prove my usefulness just to feel safe in my own home. The silence wasn't hollow anymore. It was clean, spacious, undemanding. I brewed my tea in the blue ceramic mug with the chipped handle and let it steep longer than usual. I didn't check messages. I didn't expect any. I opened my paper planner, yes, the kind with ink smudges and scribbled notes in the margins, and scanned the day's page. A walk to the bank, a stop at the florist, maybe a library visit if I felt like it. For the first time in a long while, my time was mine alone, and I had no intention of spending it on anyone else's terms. I put on my pale linen blouse and flat shoes, with soles worn smooth from years of walking. The morning was warm but breezy, and the neighborhood was soft with the sound of sprinklers ticking across grass. I walked slowly, deliberately, past the same houses I'd lived near for decades, houses that had changed families more times than I could count, but still waved when I passed. At the bank, it was cool and quiet. The air smelled like a mix of old receipts, laminated folders, and faint perfume. The young teller greeted me by name. She had that smile reserved for elderly customers, polite, careful, slightly condescending. But I didn't mind. She asked how she could help, and I told her, just a routine check. I slid my new card across the desk. She inserted it and asked me to enter my PIN. I paused, not because I forgot, but because I remembered everything it stood for. 4 digits. Those numbers weren't just access. They were a ceremony, a quiet line in the sand. They marked a decision I had made alone, in silence, under no one's influence but my own. They were not a birthday, not an anniversary, not anything sentimental. They were a private date of transformation, the day I froze my accounts and took my power back. That number had never been shared, not written down, not whispered during a holiday dinner or handed over with the confidence that comes from trust poorly placed. It was mine, solely, without apology. I pressed each digit slowly, deliberately, accepted, and just like that, the vault opened, not just to my money, but to my peace. I took the printed slip from the teller and tucked it into my purse. Then I walked home the long way, through a side street lined with magnolias and sleepy porches. I stopped at a florist I hadn't visited in years and bought a small bouquet of sunflowers and eucalyptus. The woman behind the counter wrapped it in brown paper and tied it with twine. At home, I placed the flowers in the tall glass vase that used to hold anniversary roses from my husband. It now stood on the kitchen table like a new flag, something bright, something intentional. I made myself a grilled cheese sandwich and sat by the window with a book I hadn't finished from 3 winters ago. I didn't check the clock. I didn't rush. Later that afternoon, I took out my notebook, the one with the leather cover and frayed corners, and began a list. Not chores, not goals, not financial tasks, but things I wanted to feel in the months ahead. Gratitude, clarity, wholeness, boundaries, freedom. I wasn't planning to rebuild what had been lost. I wasn't going to sweep away the past like it hadn't happened. But I wasn't going to live in it either. If my grandson called again, he would find me here, still soft, still kind, but unshakable. He wouldn't get the same version of me, because that woman, The one who left doors unlocked and bank accounts unguarded was gone. What remained was a woman who no longer confused generosity with obligation, who knew her worth not in dollars, but in decisions, who had learned that love without respect is not love at all. It's leverage. My legacy wouldn't be the balance in my accounts. It wouldn't be what I left behind in material form. It would be what I demonstrated through action. That protection is love. That peace is earned. That power, real power, can live in a single line of numbers, especially 4 of them. That pin wasn't just a passcode. It was a declaration, a closing, a beginning, and above all, a promise to never give myself away without intention again.